And that's the majority of people, right? That's why I think that people follow fads and they follow the masses, because they just get caught up in it, and the feeling of being part of a crowd, being part of a group. And Robin talks about that too, about how we used to be we needed to be part of a tribe, or we wouldn't survive, right? And so it talks to, I think, the power of a leader being able to use that same power of emotion, but for good, right? To mobilize people for good.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I think something that we're doing in this group is really focusing on the heart of leadership, what makes a good leader, and really trying to impact society by improving our own leadership skills. And that in itself can speak to that both what, we're basically trying to make powerful leadership, servant leadership, the fad, right? And at least what we're trying to do in this community. And so usually fads are going to be something that appeal, as you said, to our emotions. But through this book, I also feel like we're trying to not just appeal to our emotions, which refers to our senses, but also to our mind, our body, and our soul, which also is trying to, again, we're by studying exemplary acts, we're hoping that other people will join us. So thank you for sharing, just making that connection to our emotion. That's really a great comment. Ambika?
I have just been, in the work we do, there's a big module around social connections and the impact on health and well-being. And so it's a big area of interest, of study for me. And, with the need of the masses to willingly, like how they're willingly subordinate and how we follow fads. There's so much research that I recently came across that talks about how, whilst we are social beings, and really just building off of the points you already made, and just a bit more onto that, is that we are social beings. However, the shift over generations has gone from social beings connected by spiritual values and teachings, and therefore grounded in harmony, common cause, trust, and love, to, over time, the more we started to relate to ourselves as individual beings. We may still show up in collective gatherings, but it's very much so shifted from the whole concept of fads and just doing whatever, is coming from being now bonded through fear. So the fear of not wanting to disagree at the risk of causing confrontation, at the risk of being made an outsider, where we now totally will do whatever it takes to please a collective group's values, even if it's at the cost of our own values. And the highest price being paid is our own emotional and mental well-being, but of course our physical, mental, and our bodies are communicating it loudly to us, we just don't hear it. And I think returning to such texts, but even Martin Luther King talks about how can we be extremists for love, which isn't just being nice everywhere you go, but how can you speak your truth in a way that mobilizes, these stagnant collective gatherings in order to convene for something bigger than our own individual existence, where we can't follow a fad. Human rights was a trend, or optimal health and well-being is a trend, but the collective gathering then is with a very, very different intention, rather than one where we just simply convene for the heck of belonging at the cost of every core value to us.
Yeah, that quote you shared by Martin Luther King is really powerful. And it speaks to the first point that's in these 10 principles of authentic leaders. They love people and are sensitive to their emotions and needs. And I think just shifting the conversation on leadership to how we can better, because ultimately, based on the ancient wisdom texts of yoga, love essentially means service, right? And service means that the leader has to remove themselves out of the center. And so so much of our, as I think, Ambika, as something that I was gathering from what you were saying was that when there's strong, the leadership today sometimes is so focused on the short term, and that short term outlook is really what sometimes diminishes the endeavor, because again, and short term meaning even someone's term as a leader, right? Whether it be the 4 years or however much long people may be in, that then it just again becomes about gathering as much power as they can, or sometimes even wealth as they can in that short time, and then moving forward. Whereas again, automatically it's such a powerful thing, as you said, how can we be extremists of love? That automatically has to shift our consciousness and our focus. So thank you.
Ricken, could I just ask you to repeat something which was so powerful, where you said, based on ancient texts on leadership, love is service, and therefore, when you stand in love, the eye is naturally taken out of focus. And I, of course, paraphrase, but could you just recreate what you had said?
Oh yeah, so it's like specifically the Bhagavad Gita, it will discuss very in depth that the basis of genuine love, and so genuine love is based at the level of the soul, that removes the externalities, but that connection from soul to soul is one of service. So if I genuinely love someone, I will serve them, right? And meet them where they're at. And I think that to me is how I think of service, is not just I want to give them what I want to give them, but I want to give them what is in fact good for them and is the need for them, or the best for them. I just wanted to welcome Enver, who's joined. Thank you, Enver, for joining us. And Ronnie, it's good to see you again.
Hi all.
Ronnie and Enver, we were just reading in the first section, why good leadership is essential. I was just opening up the discussion with Voltaire at the bottom of the first paragraph. It was talking about the tendency for the masses to follow fads. And then I was just connecting that to 3:21 of the Gita, where it says, whatever actions a great man performs, common men follow, and whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. And so Stacy was building on that, just talking about how so much of our following is based on emotions, but really the discussion that we're trying to set here as leaders in this book is how, as leaders, can we create a fad around loving people more, and then hopefully trying to be better, to serve people better. And that really is changing the focus or the intention of us being leaders. So that's where what we've been discussing the last few minutes.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments to share on this?
Only from my side. I will remain only as listener today. I am in the office, go in and out. I am very sorry, but I will follow. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just connected to this point that we were talking about is following fads. I just wanted to flip to, it's page 24 in the original, the newest book, but Systems of Government, and the section on democracy, because that is the majority of governments in the world today. And I'll just read the bottom, it's the bottom paragraph where they start talking about democracy. So it's the third paragraph into democracy. Democracy has been referred to as demon crazy. That is because there's an inherent and essential flaw in its methods. Reality is not dictated by majority vote. That is simply because the majority agree on a particular course of action does not make the action the proper way to go. For example, if a group of children were to vote on how many days per week they wish to attend school, there would be few days school in a year. Similar, when people tend to be both of mundane quality and misinformed about the goal of life, they will agree on a substandard, irreligious lifestyle and cause disturbance in society. Clearly, popular vote is not the best way to discern right from wrong. And the reason I wanted to just bring this point up is it just fits, again, it ties into this point from Voltaire, is that we may see so many things going on, but I think it's always just important for us as leaders to step back and ask ourselves, just because a majority are voting for something, and this may be a strong comment, but I use the United States, 4 years ago, voting for Trump as an example. Because the majority do it, doesn't make it the right decision or the decision that's going to benefit the most people. So again, that was just something that came to mind when I read that section. But again, just wanting to bring up this point that when, if the majority are going with something such as a fad, or they vote for something, we as leaders should step back and ask ourselves, is this really what's best for society and the best, as BT Swami is saying, is it the action, is it the proper way to go? Did anyone else have any thoughts or reflections? Hey, Avantika, we're just reading at the bottom of page 24 in the new latest edition, but it's the part on democracy. And we were just reflecting on this point here, that the reason why democracy is, there's a flaw in democracy, is that because the majority agree on a particular course of action does not make that action the proper way to go. So that was just a point that we just brought up. And I was just speaking that as leaders, we should at least just step back and ask ourselves this question, that although the majority are going behind something, is that really what's the best for society? Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments?
Ricken, I just wanted to share, I've always, again, purely through, I guess, the way democracy has been framed and structured in context of past systems, it occurred like it was an advancement, right? So to just see the opening sentence here, which is democracy has been referred to as demon crazy, is already like a pattern interrupt and aha to my brain. But what I love about this paragraph is the bit that actually is such an aha and so obvious, yet something that's almost always an oversight, which is when people tend to be both of mundane quality and misinformed about the goal of life, then they will agree to substandard irreligious lifestyle and cause disturbance in society. And it's a no-brainer that popular vote doesn't work in those situations. And yet we've been so conditioned and hardwired to assuming and supporting this concept of, the majority vote, whatever it is, like works, because in some way we all feel like we've been heard and served, and therefore some fairness shows up in that space. But actually, if the consciousness is coming from one of scarcity, then heck, it's more of the same, just a different version of it into existence. So and really, that's just an eye-opener.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
The whole thing is actually pretty eye-opening. I've quite enjoyed it, although I did see some things not coming by going through it, in terms of just a monarchy being the way to go. But now that I've gone through it and read it, it does make a lot of sense. There's so many examples of democracy gone wrong, from micro level small organizations to the countries and so on. So it has a lot of wisdom. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's setting a very high bar and standard for leadership at a higher level. And so it brings us to this section. I wanted us to read at the top of 28, but it's a section called The Value of a Divinely Inspired Monarch. And I was hoping someone could read for us. Please, Paul.
So monarchy in its most wonderful sense is sacred rule. Vaisnavas appreciate monarchy in its current sense, for such a system upholds a king who rules on behalf of the Supreme Lord. A king who follows scriptural authority, his spiritual advisors, and his divinely inspired predecessor kings will offer knowledge of right and wrong, as well as time-tested techniques of spiritual leadership that work. This cancels the need for speculation about what policies are just, what is good for people, and what is the highest concern. In the so-called democracy of today, it is said that all people are equal. As we've seen, however, all people are not equal. People of different grades according to their inherent natures and developed qualities. Thus, an enlightened, God-conscious monarch is needed to guide the people towards a higher goal in life, to represent people's spiritual needs. God-conscious monarch or leader will manage from a spiritual paradigm. We often think that having power means having the ability to manipulate. The sign of a civilization that has fallen in its full reliance on external things and its lack of independent power, which in reality translates into its lack of spiritual wisdom. The more powerful an individual or civilization, the more they are able to go within, develop their internal life. When the state degrades, it is a sign that its leadership is focused on external and selfish interests. When a monarch begins to exploit the citizens to achieve his political ends or the fulfillment of his sectarian interests, then it becomes totalitarianism. Powerful is wonderful when used properly, but when it is used improperly, it is tremendously dangerous. Vaishnavas, again, support divine monarchy. Perhaps that sounds radical in light of today's world situation, and it did to me personally. But we are speaking about sacred rule connected with the ancient tradition of enlightened leadership. Monarchs who are spiritually and materially responsive to the needs of the whole kingdom. The conditioned souls of the material world are trying to play God. When the leaders try to play the same game by gathering as many of the Lord's opulences onto themselves as possible instead of protecting the citizens, we have an unhealthy situation. Humanity becomes transformed into individuals who coerce and manipulate others to gain power. In such a society, people lose their focus on soul and forget the real nature of the living entity. Divine monarchy is meant to protect them from such an end.
Thank you. Any comments or reflections?
My personal favorite is the second sentence. The king who follows scriptural authority, spiritual advisors, and his divinely inspired predecessor kings will offer knowledge of right and wrong, as well as time-tested techniques of spiritual leadership that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was always the way that the king was always surrounded by brahmanas or saintly people, and they would pretty much be, it would be them that would help cast a vision for leadership and society, because they come from a space of, they're very learned and trying to live the purest life possible. They can approach and see things from a space of detachment, which is very much important for a leader, because naturally a lot of times leaders also can be fallible to making decisions based on their emotions. So that check system and balance was always there for an advisory board of saintly people. Christina.
Yeah, that's very challenging paragraph, just taking you to re-question everything what you are taking as normal actually. But frankly, like I just think I liked especially the sentence, power is wonderful when used properly, but when used improperly, it's tremendously dangerous. And it doesn't matter what the system is, it's as soon as somebody like lose this fate of loving and caring for in favor of somebody you are ruling or having power of to external and selfish interests. It doesn't matter which system we are, it fails. There are monarchies which were blossoming and failed because of that. And any system, I suppose, we're trying to create to find a way how we interact and go forward in the community. It's exactly on this value-based matter. So it doesn't matter the system we build if there are no values or the fad of this love and service are disappearing, everything is failing. So it's just like my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, it's a very great point that you're making, that if our power is not based on some set of values, then it will definitely lead to improper use of that power. Avantika.
So there's something that's triggered me ever since I've read this section. In fact, the whole ideology, because yes, a lot of democracy hasn't worked, but then a lot of monarchy hasn't worked as well. And of course, those reasons are specified when people, take power into themselves and abuse it and stuff like that. But also this whole concept of servant-led leadership, it's also about ego death. And I think Vibhu and I had a good conversation 2 weeks ago. We're talking about when you stop thinking that you're special or chosen, right? Because we see a lot of this obsession with royalty, blue blood, something that's kind of, born into something that's special from the thing, kind of touched by the divine, and everyone else is common, the commoners, and lesser than. We've seen that in caste systems, we've seen it in classism and things like that. I think monarchy as a concept is as flawed as democracy. And I don't personally resonate with an ideal of leadership being either lying in monarchy or in democracy. I think there are, cases where either works. But I think it's all, one of my really good leaders when I was much younger had given me a very good insight, because at that time I had this blind faith that democracy is the way to go. So to argue from that perspective, they said that no, when, things are in such a mess, possibly what the world needs is benevolent autocracy. And that to me was like something that I'd never heard before. And it was such a cognitive shift for me to make that I was quite disturbed by it. And it took me like, I'm still not sure whether that, but he was a very good leader. So I trusted that, he's put a lot of thought and insight into it. But the other aspect of it also is that I believe that even if the popular vote is not the right vote or the correct vote, it must always be considered because it's a reflection of where society is at that time. So by disregarding it or not considering it, you don't have something that's represented very well. And, everywhere that this, another thing that's triggering me is because this is regressive in its, sometimes ancient wisdom, when it gets translated to modern day times, you've got to do a lot of translating. And everywhere, this whole thing of monarchy, the chosen one, the divinely ordained one, the king is mentioned, it does something to me. It's I have to admit, it kind of, it goes against the grain of representation of, I don't know, a bias-free kind of a thing, especially when we've lived in the oldest living civilization in India. We've seen the abuse of the sectarian casteism and classism. In Europe, we've seen that, in almost every royal family over there, we've seen that. So where do I take this agitation?
It's a great point, Avantika. I was just something that I was reflecting on what you were saying is, could not benevolent autocracy be also a divine monarchy? Meaning that benevolence coming from a space that,
yes.
Again.
It is exactly what this book is saying, is exactly what my leader was also referring to. So to that extent, yes, this wise leader is saying this, that wise leader in my life also said this. I was triggered then and I'm triggered now. So it's exactly the same thing.
No, thank you. Does anyone want to share a comment or a thought to?
If I may.
Please, thank you, Ed.
First of all, it's great to see all of you. And thank you, Avantika. It's really, it's always wonderful to hear thoughts. And I definitely understand where you're coming from. And I'll be honest, I can relate to it. Because to echo your point, we have, and we continue to see in positions of power, people often misuse that. And it's interesting because, I was actually looking at this section, obviously in preparation today. So it's exactly what's explained by B.T. Swami in there. And I know that when he talks about different systems of government, he says exactly that point. And it's a very interesting principle in life. For example, the people who are closest to us, they're the people who can help us the most. We sometimes hear that, but we don't necessarily really think it through. Why? Some people, they've decided that I'm not going to be close to anyone because I had close friends, close relationships, and I got mistreated. So they throw out the baby with the bathwater. So the people who are closest to us, they can hurt us the most or they can help us. So to your point, when something is of a certain caliber and it's done properly, there's a maximum benefit. But like BT Swami does explain, because he's saying the same point that you're making, he's saying that we have seen, and when monarchy is misused, it can cause the greatest damage. He actually explicitly states that. So I don't think you're actually saying something different. I think you're actually saying the same thing. And that is that if something is properly, let's say, if the citizens and the leader is proper, huge. And why do we know this? We know this because we see this in family life, right? You have children who are actually dependent on their parents. Now, if the parents are really good, that dependency will mean the child will get everything. I was speaking to someone recently who said that they missed out on their childhood. And they explained what actually happened. They said that when they were young, their mother in particular was unwell. So they had to grow up early because they had to literally be like the parent to support their mum emotionally and sometimes in other ways. And what they regret now is they never had a childhood because they never had a situation where they were completely carefree and someone else was completely doing everything for them. So in the same way, if we consider that exchange between a parent and children, when the parents are proper, they provide all the support, and the child, it doesn't remain dependent. The child can be carefree, but the child will also grow into a parent in their own right. So I'm just echoing your point that if it's used wrongly, absolutely. And let's be honest, in the modern age, many things tend to be used wrongly. We can't deny that. I think the point that's being made,
previous ages, as in all ages.
Yeah, well, as in many ages, but we also know from the Mahabharata, there were times, I mean, when we're reading about certain kings like the Arjuna and the Pandavas, there were also times in history, and I'm not saying across the board, let's be very clear, but and actually, I would even say even now, you could argue that even now, although there is a lot of corrupt leadership, I'm looking at you guys as leaders right now. I wouldn't say that you're corrupt. I would actually say the opposite, hopefully, because we're trying to talk about how to be good leaders. So I think we have to also recognize that there are people in the world, such as yourselves, who are very interested in being role model leaders. I think there are people, and I think I would say that it would be unfair for us to confine that just to the people on this call right now. I would say that there are other business leaders, there are other political leaders, I'm not saying all of them, but there will be other people in positions of leadership in the world who are both have integrity, who are authentic, and who also aspire, as you're all doing, as we're all doing, to improve the quality of their leadership. So I think it's a both and rather than an either or. Yes, these situations and systems can be misused. I don't think in every situation they are misused. So I think we just have to we have to look at the quality and the caliber of the people who are in those positions. Anyway, that's just my reflection on what I was hearing. I know I came in a bit late, so I accept that I'm just catching the last part of the scene. Okay.
And we just started the discussion today. I read the first quote. It's at the first page of Why Good Leadership is Essential. And I compared Voltaire's quote of the masses tending to follow fads to 321 in the Gita. Yes. That if we as leaders set the exemplary act, which is what Ambika was just quoting Martin Luther King about just being extremists of love, that this really changes the focus of our leadership as leaders. And that we want to make this, this orientation of leading on the basis of love and through service, the new fad as leaders.
Oh, wonderful. That's a really wonderful point. I don't jump in until
no. And so we had just read that section, and then we were just we had read the section on the value of divinely inspired monarch. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the last point I was just going to bring up before we just transitioned over to you was this section on equality.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to refer to section, it's at the bottom of 26, or the section is systems of government. And I'll just go ahead and read it, but it says, perhaps it sounds contradictory that Vaishnavas should not see everyone as equal, since Vaishnavas are supposed to be compassionate. Compassion refers to the ability to feel deep sympathy and sorrow for another's suffering or misfortune, accompanied by a desire to alleviate the pain or remove its cause. It is based on the ability to empathize, to experience another's pain as if it were our own. Compassion, therefore, is based on the sense of equality. How can Vaishnavas then, as spiritualists, be people who are concerned about all living entities and aware of everything is coming from God, contend that everyone is not equal? Vaishnavas see equality in its most profound sense. Equality to a Vaishnava means that every living entity is an eternal spirit soul, part and parcel of God. And this is the basis for each person's sameness. They understand, however, that all bodies are not equal. There's a hierarchy based on a particular entity's ability to dominate material nature. This refers to natural differences that exist in nature, not arbitrary differences concocted by man. And then the quote here is, all transformations and variety in respect to living entities are due to the body. As far as the spirit is concerned, living entities are the same. As spirit souls, we all have equal potential to realize actual natures and our relationship with the Supreme Lord. However, this may not be politically correct. We are not equal in desire, interest, material strength, or knowledge. The differences between us are caused by how the material modes act upon us according to our desires and past deeds. To see everyone as the same on this level is to deny each person's unique abilities and needs. Therefore, we can begin to understand the need for monarchy. We must understand the naturalness of hierarchy. With that knowledge, we can examine democracy and appreciate it for what it is, but not blind toward what it is not. So to me, the really powerful section here was just defining equality and how it may be, how it is very different than the modern day's understanding of equality. Did anyone have any thoughts or reflections? Please, Vibhu.
I was thinking about what you just read, and in the context of what Avantika said regarding benevolent autocracy. And I spent some time in Singapore, which is probably one of the closest examples of a benevolent autocracy, because it was founded by this one person, not founded, but he was the first leader, and that party remains in power to date. And in a survey some years ago, I mean, there's more dissent now in Singapore, but they thought of Lee Kuan Yew as their father. You know, people would think of the leader as a family member, like that's how they thought of him. And it was a swampland that became a world-class city with, I mean, you know, human rights are debatable in many ways in that culture and context, but like freedom of religion and basic freedom, certainly. So it's just a very interesting example of how at the time, and if you were to read about the way Lee Kuan Yew operated and made decisions, very, very, very sort of unilateral in some ways, but always keeping in mind what would benefit the country most in some ways. There are people that debate that and disagree, but really interesting example of how a country developed in a part of the world where many other countries don't have that level of freedom of religion or economic growth or safety and many other things.
Thank you, Vibhu. I never knew that about Singapore in terms of its style of leadership, at least currently and in the past. So thank you for sharing that. Ronnie, did you want to share something?
Yeah, just wanted to add a couple of things that come to mind from this reading and from we've used certain aspects of one part of the Bhagavad Gita to create our values in our own leadership coaching. And we had compassion there, and compassionate was where you feel that pain of another, similar to what it says here. It touches on that point. And what we started to find is that as we're training our coaches and leaders to experience that, at the end of their coaching period, after 90 days, we would hear people come back to us and say, it was really traumatic for me because this person would come on my call and I was practicing compassion and really going through the pain themselves, and I couldn't sleep, and I was miserable after that because I was experiencing their pain. And we had to reword and reframe compassion in the context of empathy and as a leader, as somebody who empathizes, gets into the world of what that person's dealing with, but doesn't necessarily embody or own or go through the misery, right, of it themselves, doesn't get that loss of power. So that was the first thing that stood out for me, where it's making reference to Vaishnavas should have that compassion, is we can be empathetic to something, but not going into, for lack of a better word, as a leader, a pity party of what somebody may be dealing with or struggling with. And the second thing that I think that I'm getting from this is we mix up, I guess, equality with being equal. I think by saying or thinking we're equal, we're saying everybody is the same. And I think the way we phrase it is that everyone has a sort of equal right to tap into or live into their greatest potential. But they will all have unique strengths. They will all have unique way that comes to the fore. And they will also all not be equal at a point in time where they are going through their growth journeys or through their own personal development. And so I guess the approach of treating people with equality is kind of treating them with the equal potential, rather that they have that potential, rather than that's where they already are.
I want to say thank you very much for sharing that. And it seems you've had a very, very interesting conversation, as always. So that's really wonderful. I just wanted to take this a step on in terms of today's conversation. So many things have been spoken about, and you've touched upon this idea. It's a very powerful point. You've touched upon this idea that we all have huge potential. Now, what we translate of that potential into actuality, that's something that we'd like to do a little activity and discussion around today. So we're all in positions of leadership. And many of you have made very, very good points about the importance of leadership, how leadership is necessary to do some coordination, okay? But it can also be misused. One of the things you've also touched upon is this idea of potential. Now, there's two things in the balance. There's potentiality and there's actuality. So to your point, Ronnie, one of the reasons why there are differences is because everyone has potential. Now, what potential we invest in and transform into something manifest in the world, that's a free will decision that we all make. And it's also a trade-off, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to be investing in my leadership skills, so I may not be investing in my cooking skills at this time. I've decided that this is more valuable for me at this particular point, and I'm going to put my time and energy in this particular area. So there will always be differentiation as long as there are also choices, right? As everyone has free will and has free choices, we can choose to cultivate certain aspects of our lives, and we may choose, this aspect of my life is not really important, or it's not important right now. It may be important to me later on, but for right now, I'm more focused in this area. I was reading an article, and it was giving some careers advice to the next generation. It was very interesting. They were saying careers advice to the next generation: in the beginning of your career, put a lot of investment into it right now. If you want work-life balance, and by investing in your career now, you'll put yourself in a position where you have more opportunities and choices in the mid to long term for that particular balance, especially when it's most useful. And I just thought it was an interesting angle. I mean, different people have different views about it. It was an interesting angle. And when I thought about the session for today, and I was thinking, what could be an exercise or activity that will really give tremendous value to all of us? I had a particular thought that came to my mind, and it's a very, this is also in some ways a traditional piece. I'm going to just share this idea or this exercise with you, and then we're going to ask you to do this. So let me share my screen. Okay. So you'll be able to see my screen. I'm going to go full screen. So we've been looking at the Leadership 2 book. We've been exploring this idea of why good leadership is essential. And what I also wanted to do here was build some awareness around our particular leadership, our particular strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we're going to go into that in this particular session. We're going to really look at this idea of awareness. To your point, Avantika, one of the dangers when people are in any position of leadership is that they may also think that they're doing good, but they may lack self-awareness. They may not take into account, which I think is a completely fair point, where the people that they are leading are coming from, right? And we also see that in the Mahabharata, in Ramayana, etc., one of the leaders' duties was to know where the citizens were at. And that's a very, very key part of the equation. So there's no doubt that that's very essential. What I wanted to do is get you to think about your leadership in this way, okay? We wanted you to do this exercise, building awareness around your leadership in these 4 dimensions. So we're going to be looking in a moment, or getting you to look in a moment in these 4 areas. What are your strengths as a leader? Then I'm going to ask, we're going to make this twofold. I'm going to ask you to consider your strengths as a leader. I want you to also write down the strengths of your initiative, meaning the project that you're leading. So there's 2 levels for each of these 5. Okay, and I'll explain the additional factors in a moment. So you're going to write down, as a leader, what are my strengths? And again, no false humility. You're going to write these down honestly and put them down for the record. The second factor to strengths, what are the strengths of my business or project, whatever it is, in entrepreneurial initiative? You're going to write that down also. So for each of these 5, there'll be 2 areas of consideration. The next is you're going to write down honestly, what are my weaknesses as a leader? Okay. And then what are the weaknesses of my current organization or initiative? Then you'll go to the third one. What are the opportunities for me as a leader? Okay. Some of you have opportunities to build the brand. For others, there are opportunities for mentoring. For others, there are opportunities for, let's say, further development in terms of getting feedback from other people, whatever it is that's relevant to you. And I do stress this, the idea that we want it to be valuable, so it's a question of what's relevant to you, but opportunities, 2 levels. What are the opportunities for me as a leader? Second level, what are the opportunities for my project, company, organization? For example, your organization may be invited to collaborate with another company. Your organization may have opportunities to build the brand by doing more on social media or advertising. You're going to write this down. You're going to build conscious awareness in this area. Next one, threats. I was speaking to a manager recently, and we were discussing, some of you will remember this. Anyone remember Blockbuster Video? Do you remember those? Okay, a few of us back in the day. What was interesting is Netflix. When Netflix was established, they came to Blockbuster Video. They said to them, we've got this platform where videos can be shown. Are you interested in buying us out? Blockbuster Video didn't recognize the opportunity. They didn't do anything based upon the opportunity. Now, they're not even present. I'm very interested in you as leaders having a real thought and awareness building around threats, because I was discussing this with a close friend of mine recently, that when we don't see a situation in its early stages, when we don't strategize with that understanding in mind, then as leaders, we often become irrelevant. And when our businesses make the same mistake, those businesses are on the threshold of extinction. So I want you to really look at threats, 2 levels. Threats to you as a leader, okay? So what are patterns? It's not just weaknesses. What are patterns that I'm doing as a leader that can actually diminish my authority, diminish my leadership in the eyes of other people, diminish my leadership in the eyes of my stakeholders, diminish my ability to lead well? For example, one threat could be to a leader that I'm not having any time to think. And so therefore I'm noticing these patterns of bad decisions or quick decisions. I'm as a leader, I'm not delegating. So I'm noticing that actually I'm getting more and more on my workload, and even my team are feeling that they're not getting an opportunity to do things that they could otherwise do. So that's one level of threat. Threats to the organization. Okay, for example, we're not getting the right kind of expertise working for us. That could be a threat. Another threat could be people are leaving the company and they're dissatisfied. So they're going into the marketplace and they're saying negative things about the organization. So now our talent pipeline is going down. That could be another type of threat. Okay, so again, two levels. One, what are threats in terms of my leadership? Second level, what are threats to the organization? And then the last factor, which I've added, and this is really important. I did some study many years ago on thinking outside the box. And one of the things that we learned when we studied this approach of thinking outside the box was that there are some things that fit beneath the categories or between the categories. So when we go to additional factors, I want you to write down anything that's on your mind that's just initially blipping on your radar. Anything that's interesting. You know, it would be interesting to see how, it would be interesting to see how my team are feeling about where the company's going. It would be another additional factor. It will be interesting to see if the vision that I've set for the company is also the vision that my team have for the company. So it may not fit under any of these other four categories, but I want you to write down under the additional factors anything else that's coming to your mind as a leader or when you think about your project, okay? And it could be anything. It could be some kind of interesting angle, something that you're just wondering about. It'll be interesting to see, there's a new technology that we've started to use in our company. It'll be interesting to see if that new technology generates some kind of new approach or causes the team to be more innovative. It could be another factor. It could be interesting to see how much the new team members bond with the previous team members. So it doesn't have to fit under any of the other four, but I want you to write that down under additional factors. Anything that's interesting to you, anything that you're curious about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a set amount of time. I'm going to look at my watch right now. I'm going to give you, let's see. It is exactly 1 o'clock UK time. I'm going to give you, let's see, 7 minutes. I want you to write down your answers to these questions, okay? Or these categories. Your SWOT analysis, 7 minutes. You feel free to switch your camera off if you wish to, okay? Write down your reflections in these areas, these 5 areas. After 7 minutes, we're going to get into some group discussions on what you've written down and what's standing out to you. Again, the theme underpinning all of this is that as a leader, one of the most essential things that you bring is your awareness. Just like a good parent is not just aware of themselves, but they're also aware of the landscape and the environment and the children in the environment. In the same way, as a leader, the more we have this awareness, the more that we can make magnificent strides by picking things up in their early stages, okay? So to carry on, so make your notes, 2 levels in each of these areas. One has how it applies to you. Second, how it applies to your business or project, okay? And then after 7 minutes, please make detailed notes because you're going to share this in small groups, your reflections in about 7 minutes. Please continue. As you do this, please try and think critically in each of these areas. I'll share with you, we do these activities with senior leaders on a regular basis, and it yields tremendous value as they're able to look at an oversight level at their organization, able to step back and do this analysis. Many insights have often come. So please do this with real thought, strengths on a leader level and a project level, weaknesses on a leadership level, project level, opportunities on a leadership level and on a project level, threats on a leadership level and on a project level, and then the last one, additional factors, which can be anything that you think I'm curious about that, I'm interested in that, I'm wondering about that. Okay. You have about another 4 minutes.
Hey, Ed.
Yes.
I just had a quick question.
Please.
You know, when you talk.
Ambika, your sound.
How would that?
Okay, your sound cut out for a few seconds. Could you repeat?
When you talk about opportunities, for me, that kind of sits in the same boat as weaknesses, in that they're both areas of expansion. Or is there a distinction between opportunities and weakness here, where there isn't an overlap?
Absolutely. So there's an overlap, but there is also a distinction. So with opportunities, it may relate more to manifest possibilities that you have at hand right now. So for example, so for example, let's say that you've recently been contacted by an advertising organization or you know someone in that particular field. Okay, so that's an opportunity. So I already know someone, I know that they're good, we have some funding available to boost our advertising. That's an opportunity. Now, it's slightly different to a weakness. A weakness may be, you know what, we are advertising, but we're not very good at it. Or the feedback we get on our advertising isn't very strong at this particular time. So that's different for me knowing exactly who to turn to, who can be good at providing advertising for our company. They've got a good cost point, we can afford it. That's a lot more active. So the weakness may be a passive flaw, but the opportunity means I've got a line of sight as to exactly what I can do about it, and I can actually take that forward. Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for the question. Okay. I'm going to ask if you've had enough time to make some initial notes. I'm not worried if you don't complete the exercise, because I would encourage you, and we've done this before also, I would encourage you to do this even at an organizational level. It's one thing that leaders do this. I would advise you or encourage you to sit down with your staff and let's look at that. Let's look at our organization and see, where do we think we're strong? Where do we think we are weak? Where do we see opportunities? Where do we see threats? And what are some other things that's on your mind that you're curious about? But we're going to start the journey here. So the idea is not that you make this comprehensive in 7 minutes, not at all. I think that'll be unrealistic. But I want us to begin the journey, and I want us to start looking to see how we can mine this analysis for realizations and insights as leaders. Okay, so we're gonna pause here. And what I'm gonna ask you to do in a moment is I'm gonna get you into small groups, and I want you to share with some of the other leaders in the small groups. What are you learning? Okay, so we'll do this in pairs. Just your initial notification, your initial writing down, your initial awareness. And again, 2 levels. I don't want you to just be confined to the business or to yourself as a leader. I want you to intertwine the 2. You're doing this analysis, you're looking at these different dimensions. What is standing out for you? Okay, the story of the ninja training is a very interesting story. There was a story of how they would train young men to become ninjas. They would get them to plant a seed in the ground and then jump over the seed many times. Okay. And over time, their ability to jump will become as high as that plant. And it was a small incremental thing. But we realized that the increments are really powerful, because when you see something at a subtle level, and this is also the benefit of practices such as bhakti yoga and meditation, the most powerful thing to refine, ladies and gentlemen, is our mentality or our consciousness. Because when we do so, we see certain tiny, small things, but we understand this is a precursor to something much greater. I had an amazing consultation yesterday. So when I left work, I went to see one Ayurvedic doctor on literally the other side of London to where I'm working. She was brilliant. And she told me many of you will be familiar with Ayurveda. It's a very ancient system of medicine. They'll take your pulse. And she told me so many things about my situation. And what I found was really helpful is how she was able to pick things up when they were very subtle. And I started to understand that, yes, in many of the ancient systems of traditional medicine, part of their power is that things are picked up before they become gross. And I'll be honest, I have found in my own life, just by cultivating this bhakti yoga knowledge, Vedic knowledge, one of the most powerful things it's done for me in my life, and it's done this repeatedly, is it has allowed me to pick up things in a very subtle way. And when it's picked up subtly, it's therefore allowed me to maximize my autonomy by making small adjustments when things are picked up in a subtle way, which can save me and which has saved me. Literally, I can tell you honestly, it saved me thousands of pounds. It saved me hours. It saved me time. It saved me energy. Ricken and I were speaking recently about a mutual friend. And I really appreciate the point that Ricken made. We were thinking about a mutual friend and a possible, he was asking for advice about a possible connection. And we both had the same conclusion. Because we know what he was like and we knew the other person, we were able to pick up at a very subtle level, at a very initial level, that I don't think the long-term trajectory will be as he wants or as the other person wants. And I took it as a metaphor for this kind of deeper wisdom, that when we are more conscious, we can make game-changing decisions that can lead us to powerful outcomes. And at the early stages of making those decisions, we can get much more benefit. So what we're going to get into with this activity is a metaphor for great leadership. One of the key qualities of great leadership is exactly this, consciousness. Hence this book title, Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness. We want you to kickstart this activity in pairs in a moment. And we want to encourage you to regularly build into your schedule time to step back from the BAU, time to step back from the business as usual and really see what's going on. Where are we doing well? Strengths. Where are we making some mistakes or having some issues, weaknesses? Where are the opportunities internal to the company, external to the company? And where are the threats internal to the company and external to the company? And in the last stage, what are we also needing to think about, or what's on our minds which does not fit under these other categories, but which is still important? I have found that for many entrepreneurs, when they do this on a day-by-day, or not day-by-day, actually that may be too frequent, when they do this on a frequent basis, with a frequency that works for them, it allows them to be far more powerful in a strategic and tactical way. And then there's one other factor. I have learned that when the company culture set by the leader engages the team in thinking in this way on a regular basis, then that company, that leader and that organization has immediately amplified their chances of success, because now it's not just a leader who's looking out for these opportunities. You have an entire organization of people who are coming to the leader. I've just found an opportunity for us. There is this big exposition or this big event that's taking place. We could be at this big event, building our brand, reaching out to potential clients. Amazing. It's not just a leader who's doing this. It's now the entire organizational culture, which is thinking in this way because the leader has set that into the organizational dynamics. So we're going to get you into pairs. We're going to give you about, let's see, we'll give you about 10 minutes to have an initial conversation. Again, we're not expecting you to get into the whole thing. You may also, with the time that we choose to give you 10 minutes, you may want to focus even on one area that stands out to you for now. That's okay. It's up to you how you spend the time. But I want you to start to discuss and dialogue on what's standing out for you when you do this analysis. Rick, and I'm going to ask you to pair them up because that you'll have access to the...
It's ready.
Yep, okay. So are there any questions before we send you into the breakout rooms? Excellent. So we'll bring you back in about 10 minutes from now. I saw someone's just dropped. Okay, Rick, and you do. Okay, that's fine. Excellent. Okay, so first of all, thank you for having that conversation. What I'm going to do now, and I can see some smiling, so I'm going to take that as a good sign. I'm gonna throw this out to you. And the first thing, before you even get into the content, I want to know how did it feel to do this activity? Okay, you were writing down. The first part was you were reflecting, and then you were discussing. How did it feel to do this activity? I'm going to throw it out to you. Feel free to unmute and just let me know. Vivu, yeah. Vivu, you don't have to even raise your hand if you just unmute and unleash.
Very uncomfortable because I think I spend a lot of time on how I'm flawed, and it was still uncomfortable to write about that. And what I'm also realizing is what I don't shed light on, I can't own or use or transform. And it was very uncomfortable for me to do this, but I had an excellent partner, and it was really lovely to hear her. So that was really nice.
Okay, and I'm just going to add, to be very transparent, both Rick and I, we had a conversation while you were doing the activity. And we were just talking about the value of sometimes stretching boundaries and the value of that. And so be prepared that we may give you different activities to do with a loving, compassionate heart, which may really challenge some of those paradigms and may cause you to have to look at certain things. But Vibhu, I loved your point because I'll tell you honestly, I was dealing with a situation recently where someone had some bad health. And it's now had to be dealt with in a much more, let's say, intense way. But the conversation I was having, I think it was just yesterday or maybe even this morning, was that if that situation has been picked up early, and I really feel strongly about this, had that situation had been picked up early because there were early warning signs, it could have been a much easier situation to deal with. So when I was speaking to this person this morning, we were talking about the importance. We see this in all fields of life, whether it's leadership, family life. You have sometimes individuals who want to be in denial. We sometimes want, I don't want to look at that because it may be awkward, it may feel awkward, but I'm like, no, let's look at it. Because linking to that, if we catch it early, we have so much more power to make a difference. If we catch a situation early and acknowledge it, yes, this is going on, but I'm catching it in the early stages. So I've been, over the years, looking at different aspects of medicine, health, alternative medicine, just basics around Ayurveda. And I have this conviction, we have increasing numbers of people who are diagnosed with cancer and this has been happening over decades. But according to certain ancient systems of medicine, certain basic lifestyle changes can greatly reduce the likelihood of catching of a person being diagnosed with cancer. You know, and I can see Avantika's nodding. You're aware of this, and I'm thinking, think about how powerful that would be at a society level. If people were aware, if you just make these small lifestyle changes, tiny things early on, you can actually greatly eradicate the likelihood that in your later stages of life, that you're going to have some of these really serious illnesses. And in that same spirit, we're offering you this kind of activity. Let's catch things early. And it's not just bad things. Rick and I were also talking about that. There are some opportunities we can catch early. Imagine, you know, when MySpace came out, right? So there was one social media platform called MySpace. It was a precursor to Facebook, Instagram, so many of these things. It was at that point that some companies saw this is going to be huge. This social media is going to be huge. Now, the businesses which caught that early, the early adopters, they were all over these new platforms, advertising, getting customers, getting business, making millions. And that's why we're doing this activity. Awareness is the precursor to meaningful and potent activity, whether it's a leader, whether it's a company. And that's why we're asking you to do this. So thank you, Vibhu, for kicking us off. Who else would like to share? How did this feel? Ambika.
So I think when I started strengths and weaknesses, there was some familiar things that were coming down. But then when we went into opportunities, it was a different headspace where I had to kind of just not go into the robotic list and actually think about what are the opportunities. The one that hit home the hardest that I discussed with Christina was threats to my leadership. And I never saw them as threats. They kind of were just there. But when you word it as threat, it's kind of like, okay, I got to straighten my back and lean in a bit more because heck, they are threats. And then the additional factors that come to mind, I think was super exciting because the inquiry came on in the passage we just read in the book earlier today was the concept of having the rishis and the spiritual minds as advisories. When and how did that go out of existence? We do not have rishis as our spiritual advisors now, right? And yet many times I've thought I gotta get Ed on as one of our advisories of a banker. So just FYI putting that there.
Always.
But there's like a need for it, right? Because spiritual wisdom encompasses leadership and it's not religion, but I think somewhere we kind of lost that grand resource. So how do we create a spiritual advisory board? And then leverage collaborations, for example. I think we're all on such exciting paths and at times sell ourselves short by doing it ourselves. And we may build our own teams in our own respective roles, our way, versus just collaborating and having more of these kind of convenings where the best of intentions and greatest of leaders convene to impact humanity.
Absolutely. I'm going to pause for a moment because I'm also conscious. Do we have another 4 minutes or do we need to end? Do people need to go very soon? What's your situation? 4 minutes? Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, no problem, Paul. Okay, Vivi, you got more time? Another 5 minutes? Okay, perfect. Does anyone need to leave immediately? Okay, good. So yeah, that's true. I mean, one other thing, for example, if you're not doing so already, I want to encourage you, find out what each other's doing. If you don't know already, your peers on this call, what are the business opportunities? Are there some win-win activities that we can do? Are there some collaborations between what you're doing and what some of the other people on this call are doing? What we do with leaders worldwide is we encourage them to engage in networking to find out, what are you doing? Who are your suppliers? Who's doing your advertising? I saw your advertising, it's very good. Okay, this person is good. We can leverage him for us. Yeah, there's a huge magnifying effect when people come together and they're open and there's a culture of trust. The difficulty is that in modern society, there's not much trust. So even if you have something going on, oftentimes you can't speak about it because people misuse the understanding. But this is a good forum for having that real benefit coming through. Thank you for that, Ambika. Anyone else? Any other comments? You did this activity. Any reflections, insights, anything that stood out to you? Cool.
It was great chatting with Enver. He's always lovely energy. And I did, it was both, yeah, nice to focus on myself. I hadn't done the exercise quite this way before, and also made me feel quite vulnerable. But Enver provided some fantastic wisdom about sometimes, particularly when I was going into the project that is causing me difficulty at the moment. He said, you know, sometimes you just have to let go and let the angel come help you. So it's been fantastic. I love this group and I love these chats.
Thank you, Paul. Avantika, I can see you've unmuted.
Yeah, I have Vibhu as a lovely partner, and I think both of us were pretty much on. So for me, the insights was how much more comfortable I am with how flawed I am. I remember 15 years ago doing SWOT and just glossing over all of the weaknesses, right? And just, no, I'm being very defensive about them. So I'm very happy to see that I'm very, very much more comfortable in my flawedness right now. And then there are some reasonably strong threats. So yeah, I think Vibhu and my conversation was primarily around how this is a journey, how we're bumbling and discovering every single day, how there's a progression, we're growing in certain areas. It's very easy to see now what the blind spots were previously. No clue what the blind spots currently are, only time will tell. I guess, you know, some of the things which have operated as strengths previously may become threats right now. For example, being overly optimistic was always a strength earlier, but scaling now that, you know, one is responsible for slightly more outcomes which impact many more stakeholders or in a different way. It's important to kind of create that scalable, you know, crawl, walk, run, and then fly, because it was very charming at one point to be this charismatic leader who'd come in like superwoman and save the day and all of that. But one has to, you know, grow up at some point, and that's been the learning as I see myself evolve over the years.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that openness and vulnerability. That's really, really powerful as well. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we are at time. So I'm also conscious we don't want to just to overload you, but we want you to continue this activity. Every week we give you some homework. We want you to continue working on this SWOT analysis. And if you wish to, engage your teams in doing the same and let them speak first. See what they think are the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, threats of the project before you share, because that can, if people know that you're going to share, they may go along with you. If you wait till last, that you may learn and see and perceive certain things that you would not otherwise understand by the people who are doing certain things for you on a day-to-day basis. Thank you. It's been fantastic seeing you and discussing as always. And please, you know, let's continue this dialogue going, and we'll see you next week as well. Thank you so much.